Okay, we should be all set.
Okay. I'll call this meeting to order then. This is the September 7th meeting of the City of Bowling Green's Planning Commission. Welcome to everyone who has attended tonight and thank you for coming. Jamie, would you start us off by calling the roll?
Here.
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 Here. Here. Here. Here.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on August the 3rd. We've all had the minutes sent to us ahead of time. Are there any corrections or deletions or changes that need to be made? Okay, then we will approve the minutes as originally sent to us. Next, we have lobby visitation on the agenda. The way this will work, if you care to address us about any topic that's not on tonight's agenda, now would be the time to do so. I would advise you that if you're here and you want to talk to us about the proposed zoning code, that you will have a chance to do that in a few minutes. But that's part of the agenda tonight, so we won't do that right at this instant. Is anybody want to address us during lobby visitation? Okay, doesn't appear to be so. We'll close the lobby visitation and we'll move on to the next item, which involves reviewing an owner's request to designate 328 East Court Street as a historic property on the local historic register, which would include the addition of the historic overlay zoning. Nina Vaughn is the property owner and applicant. Heather, you want to tell us about this one?
Sure, absolutely. So this actually is the first designation that a property owner basically started themselves. So pretty exciting, I think, for the city. I don't believe Nina is here tonight, but she did apply, obviously, and it was reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. They looked at their criteria for that Chapter 158 that we had wrote, a couple of years ago. And so they determined or recommended to council that this be accepted to be on the local register. And then as that process goes through, it basically gets kicked to Planning Commission for your commission to review that designation. So I did give you a copy in your packet of the application, the aerial view of the property. You can see there on the corner of Enterprise and Court Street. Also gave you a copy of the memorandum that the Historic Preservation Commission sent to council, which basically lists a brief summary of the property, the history, where it's at, the size, how it meets that criteria for designation. Also gave you a copy of the property inventory form, which basically describes the property, again, the history, the type of architecture, again, a little about the history. It also describes some of the features. You know, for example, one thing is that it really hasn't been altered besides a back porch was removed to make space for garage. So again, it's just meant to capture historic features of that home that still exist and any changes. Again, it's really a prominent property for the city. Dr. Tuller had lived there for many years, and he was very prominent in the city. So it's interesting to read about the house. And also gave you some copies of pictures that Nina gave us. Otherwise, I think that's it, unless you have any specific questions. Obviously, you'll be doing a recommendation back to council, and they would be required to hold a public hearing.
Right. And you suggested that we don't really need to have a public hearing, given that the Historic Commission has already had one and the council will be doing the same.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. Anybody have any questions or comments regarding?
I think it's exciting that the owner wants it. I mean, we worked a long time on getting that historical preservation through. So I think this is exciting.
Yeah, seems pretty straightforward to me.
Mm-hmm.
No question in my mind that the property qualifies. Okay, if there are no comments from any of the other members, I will move that we recommend to City Council that they that they recognize this as an historic property and that it be designated so under the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which would include the historic historic zoning, historic overlay zoning.
Overlay.
Yeah, that was the word I was missing there, overlay.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay. Jamie, you can call the roll, please.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, motion passes 8-0. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda, and this gets us to what probably most of the folks in the audience are here to hear about and talk about tonight. This is I'd say, this is the fourth meeting we've had where we've considered the proposed zoning code. I think it's either the fourth or fifth. I was trying a few minutes ago to count them in my mind. There was only one meeting where we didn't accept public comment. I know we've tried to go to some extremes to give everybody that wanted to talk about this zoning code a chance to do so. Now, tonight we formally have a public hearing on the matter, but it works just about the same as what we've done at the prior meetings. I think we'll start out by accepting the public comment, and then we will move into a work session to hopefully finish our review of the proposed zoning code and anticipate getting that done tonight. Do we have some people that have signed up to speak to us, Heather?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Okay, first on the list is Rose Drain.
Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Rose Drain. My husband David and I live at 228 East Court Street. I have actually just a couple of questions. We currently are a non-conforming use in a B2 zoning district, I think, at 228 East Court Street. Okay, so if we become pedestrian residential, how's that going to affect our property?
Actually, I'm kind of glad you asked that question, Rose, because there are rumors that seem to persist that if we adopt this proposed zoning code, that people will be severely impacted by it, may be forced to tear down their property, that kind of thing. If you are a legal non-conforming use now, and the proposed zoning code is adopted, you will still be grandfathered in and will still be a legal non-conforming use. You'd have the same status that you have now. It would.
Well, I would even argue, sorry. Pedestrian residential allows a 1-unit dwelling, so you would actually become a conforming property.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the signage in the pedestrian residential, what is a projecting sign? That's one of the types of signs allowed. Is a projecting sign something like the Trinity United Methodist Church has that projects colors and words?
Basically, a projecting sign.
Projects off the basement.
Right. It's more like downtown, some of the signage there. I'm trying to think of some like Mr. Spots, that shop called Model. They stick out maybe 2 feet or so,
coming
depending
out
on the
into
size of it.
Okay.
There's sometimes they're called blade signs. They have different names.
Right. Okay. So I'm concerned about within the pedestrian residential zoned places that there isn't anything about electronic signs in the proposed zoning code. And it's the Trinity United Methodist Church. They seem like very nice people, but that sign is really annoying. And I would hate to see more signs illuminating our residential neighborhoods like that one. It's, we happen to live in a busy area, but sitting on our porch, going to bed at night, having it illuminate the inside of our house 24 hours a day. Anyway, I think that perhaps the pedestrian residential ought to address what kinds of signs, what kind of electronic signs.
Noah, would you have any comment?
I can tell you exactly where electronic message centers are defined and regulated, which is page 82. And then if you go further into the sign code, and Nolan can fill in my gaps here, I just know because I freshly reread the whole thing again. You go to that zone, which is the PR you had asked about. which I believe the church asked for institutional zoning instead of the PR.
Yeah.
So you could look at institutional, depending on if that happens or not. So you go to that chart, and if you look at PR, for example, it says sign types permitted. So it says you can have 3 max, and really it says you can only do a temporary sign. The little asterisk says it's not permitted on lots with 1 unit or 2 unit dwellings for those remaining signs. But if you go to institutional, more signs are allowed, more sign types. I don't know if that helps kind of look at it a little more in depth. But I don't know if Nolan wants to fill in the gaps on that. I know there was added some additional language about the type of brightness to electronic message signs, because we know these are an issue all over the country that people don't like the brightness. So that is new to this code. We don't have it in the current code. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I will let Nolan fill in any gaps that I may have missed.
Thank you, Heather. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your question. So I'm Nolan Acase. I work with ZoneCo. We were the authors of this June 1st draft of the zoning ordinance. Yes, if you refer to page 82, which you may not have in front of you right now, it does list some standards for electronic message centers and signs with changeable copy. So it does say that an electronic message center shall not have any element that imitates motion, blinking, swiping, or changes in intensity. Copy changes must have a static hold time of at least 10 seconds. An electronic message center may not have a brightness of more than 0.3 foot candles above ambient lighting conditions when measured at the appropriate distance from the sign. The brightness shall be measured using an luminance meter and shall be measured a distance from the sign equal to the square root of 100 times the sign area. And then lastly, sign area, it's calculated there to provide even more detail on how to measure sign brightness. So I know that electronic signs are becoming more and more popular across America. And for some uses, it's important that they be able to use them, but we need to decrease the nuisances. And that's why we have some limitations on the intensity of those signs. Were there other questions about how we're regulating electronic signs?
I think as a comment, I appreciate your concern that this is maybe a different type of neighborhood, and that certain types of signs might be a nuisance there that aren't elsewhere, right? I know for me, not a point of emphasis up to now when I've looked at this, but it's a really good point. And it's certainly something that, even to the extent we don't address it tonight, I know we have members of city council here tonight. I know some are tuning in. Absolutely. I think it's something that we'll look at to make sure that there's parts of town, right, where signs have different impacts. And I think that's what I read between the lines of hearing what you say. Is that right?
Yes, but also not just the effect of that sign on us, just the effect of, if a brewery or a bar is permitted within a pedestrian residential neighborhood, will their sign be regulated so that they're not, glaring and blaring?
Got it. Okay.
And just because it says what is permitted, it doesn't say that, electronic isn't permitted. So that means it isn't. That's a question.
Right. So right now, I don't believe that we have a ban on electronic signs in that district because it doesn't say that they're banned in that district. So I would say that that's a question for the Planning Commission. Shall there be bans on electronic signs in that district or that district and other districts?
Thank you.
I'm going to add one more facet to this, not to complicate it, but Chapter 158, the Historic and Preservation Code, Architectural and Preservation Code. Let's say the church was locally designated on the historic register. signage is something, the intent there is to review, so it meets that approval of the Historic Preservation Commission. Does that make sense? So let's say if it was designated, they couldn't do whatever they wanted on the exterior, they would have to get a certificate of appropriateness through the Historic Preservation Commission. So that's another, I guess you would say, tool in the toolbox meant to maintain the character of historic areas. But again, it's not designated right now. So I'm just giving another facet of the whole code that could be impacted.
So if something is designated historic, then like their sign would have to go away? Is that what you mean?
No, well, right now they have a permit, so it's legal. So it wouldn't go away, no.
Okay. And then another question for the commission, since pedestrian residential can conditionally allow bars and microbreweries, why can it not allow restaurants? It seems to me that if people want to be walking to a coffee shop or, a mom and pop restaurant, why is that any different than, we don't want to encourage a lot more drinking in our town, right? Can't we, in pedestrian residential, can't we encourage, a nice coffee shop or a little place to go for lunch?
Yeah, we had restaurant as conditional use.
Yeah.
Okay, I must, okay.
It was on
You would not have said
after what you have.
All right,
We actually
okay,
did do
very
that.
good. Okay.
I remember we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, thank you. That's my questions for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna say, I think I know it's there.
All right, who's next, Heather?
Okay. Brian Kraft.
Brian Kraft, 155 South Maple Street. First of all, I want to thank you guys for serving on the commission. It's especially now, it's kind of a tough job, I'm sure, to go through all the nuances of the new code. So, but it is needed. I appreciate you doing it. But zoning is not something the average citizen will pay attention to, unfortunately. Your proposal draws a wide spectrum for me. I live on South Maple. On one hand, I shouldn't worry because this sort of thing gets talked about a lot, but then maybe something really never happens, right? But if it does happen, and then I come and complain, well, you should have said something when we were doing the update. So I figure I better say something now. Last meeting was mentioned by a commission member that this has been discussed by the city for a long time. Going back to the Kirby date meeting at the library, I do not recall pedestrian residential or neighborhood commercial, but several consultants later, here we are. On page 14 of the 2014 document plan, it lists things that are not working in Bowling Green. It says, we are losing people to Perrysburg was number one. And I don't think it's because they have better coffee. Or people perhaps can see the emphasis put on their school buildings and their facilities. BG has great school staff, just poor facilities, and that is hurting our community. I'm sure Mark, of all people, sees it when people come and look to decide what community they want to live in. When asked how you would like a business beside your house to a planning commission member, the response was, and this was perfect, depends on the business. I get what you're going after, but I don't know what could land right next to my house. I hear breweries and all these other things talked about, and that makes me a little uncomfortable knowing I've invested in my property thinking it was going to be left alone for years like it has been, and all of a sudden now I got a business next door. And parking seems a little one of the concerns. The comment back is exactly the point of concern for those who are paying attention. Some of you making these decisions do not live or own property in these proposed pedestrian residential area. Rules for thee and not for me make people not trust their government. Even Bentwood subdivision, which I'm sure most of you are aware of its past history with the city, will have more protection than my neighborhood. And this proposal is such a great idea and a way of attracting new property owners, then why is this not proposed in Stone Ridge? They got future plats still on the books. On Hillcrest or Westgate, for example. Perhaps it should be part of the new subdivision regulations as part of the design plans. Let's say 10% of the properties are set aside for the proposed business like a coffee shop or lawyer's office, like we mentioned last meeting, just like they are in my neighborhood. That way those citizens can walk where they want to go and those businesses too. But I can see that your minds are pretty much made up. I'm convinced council will do what they want to do as well. In this room, there used to be an organizational chart hanging in this right on that wall, and the citizens were at the top. And you work for the citizens. I don't think anybody's really listening to the people that have been coming and talking about our concerns, except for Erica, that she tried last meeting. Last meeting, one person said, we've only heard from a few folks, so it must be okay. In my past life, I could argue a similar flawed position when after plowing a foot of snow from the streets into people's driveways, if only 10 people complained, I guess that means the other 30,000 people were happy with it. That's not how it works. I bet most people don't even know what is going on in the city. Has there been a map on the front page of either the Sentinel Tribune or the BG Independent Media? Has there been anything on a map on the front page of the city's website? The city has money in the budget for advertising. Maybe the city should take out a full page ad with a map on the front page so people can see what's going on. I'm concerned most people are going to figure this out when it's too late. By the way, what's the status of all the questions that we submitted online? Is someone working to answer those? Will they be posted somewhere where we can see them? And will everybody be able to see those answers, responses?
Well, there's a variety of questions, Brian, some of which are not capable of being answered. We are going to later this evening talk about Abhishek put together a paper for us that categorize those questions, comments into different categories. We are going to go through the
Good.
document tonight.
Thank you. I just haven't heard anything about the status where they are. The real challenge for the city to move forward and help maintain good quality of life and healthy neighborhoods is to figure out the elephant in the room. A new school levy that makes our school buildings equal or better than that school up north. It's not about coffee shops in my neighborhood. I think people, when they come decide where they want to live in my neighborhood or neighborhood in Perrysburg, they're going to look at the schools first and not really about so much whether they can have a business and within walking distance. I know that's not our job here to figure out the school levy, but I just think it's something that we've kind of lost touch on. Not everybody, but some people have. So thank you for your time.
Yeah. Heather, who's
Okay.
next?
David Wilson.
Hi, I'm Dave Wilson at 208 Everly Avenue. Don't have that much to say tonight. Said enough the past couple meetings. Appreciate you at least listening to me. But just please be prepared, be alert to what the citizens that aren't really speaking, what we want in those neighborhoods that you're trying to change. We moved there because it was an R2. It wasn't going to be a public residential walking type district. That's not why we moved, invested there. Listen to other people, Brian, other people, the past couple meetings. Please listen to us. Otherwise, you force us to, either leave or ask for a referendum. I mean, if you pass it and don't take us serious, we're the citizens that live in these neighborhoods, pay the taxes in these neighborhoods. We live there. That's why we moved there. Please pay attention. Over there where Rose and David Drain live, that's the old Berry house, I remember, because I lived the house behind it. I'm from the old Wilson house, the public defender's house. I grew up in the neighborhood. I knew what the neighborhood was. Obviously, things do slightly change, but I grew up in that neighborhood. I remember every Friday night, Saturday night, I could look out my bedroom window and hear the students go downtown, have them come home drunk that night. My dad would have to turn the back light on, keep them from using our backyard for the dogs for the restroom. And so I knew what it was like. I didn't need a clock in my room. The courthouse clock was my clock and my alarm. So I grew up there. Please listen to what we citizens in our district, what we do or don't want. We live there. We may be old, we may be old fashioned, but we didn't move there to have, we can walk to downtown. I'm old, but I'm not that old. I can walk 6 blocks to downtown. Please be respectful of what we have, what we want. And that's what a number of us have invested in, not just 1 or 2 businesses. Thank you for your time.
I would point out in response to your concerns, Mr. Wilson, that this came up before, that I think your comments have by and large been more addressed to City Council than the Planning Commission. Our function is we were sent by City Council the proposed zoning code and asked to review it and make recommendations as to how it might be changed. But the decision as to whether to adopt a new proposed zoning code is wholly with City Council. The Planning Commission has no say in that whatsoever. Our recommendations are address ways in which we think the proposed zoning code could be improved. Whether the City Council adopts those recommendations or not is up to them. And even if they do or don't, there's still another decision, which is to adopt the zoning code or not adopt it. That's up to city council, not us. Okay, Heather, next.
Okay. Sean Brennan.
Good evening. My name is Sean Brennan. I live at 123.5 South Main Street, Unit C. Grew up in Bowling Green, spent most of my adult life in Bowling Green. I've owned 4 houses, 3 in the city of Bowling Green, 1 outside of Bowling Green, 2 elsewhere in the country. So I do understand the impact of zoning, and one of those houses was in the districts we're talking about. I would like to thank everyone here for their time, as well as the time for the public to speak. My purpose here tonight is to encourage the zoning commission to proceed with the recommendation of both the neighborhood commercial and the pedestrian residential zones into the city of Bowling Green Council. I wish I would have come forward earlier. I didn't realize that people who agree with what you're doing don't step up, speak up. They have a tendency to say, okay, they're doing what I want done. And that's just how it works. But there is some opposition. I understand that that needs to be addressed. One of the things I want to talk about was the history of neighborhood commerce in Bowling Green. And the two things we're talking about tonight is neighborhood commercial, which is primarily, I brought my own, I don't know, can you bring up the I probably can't bring up the visual of where neighborhood commercial is going to be.
I brought paper maps that we can share.
And that's fine. And probably everybody in this room knows, but I wanted to point out just historically how we came up with what's now predominantly neighborhood commercial. And that is that it went along 2 railroad lines in the city of Bowling Green. There's obviously downtown. Here's my little amateur graphic, but there was a railroad running on the west side of town, north and south, went clear out to Tontogany, went much farther. It was part of the Baltimore and Ohio system, which went clear to the East Coast. And when I was a kid, it was a very busy railroad. And the corridor through here had coal yards and gravel yards and other businesses, and a lumber yard that got deliveries from the railroad. These are retail. That was retail. There's down on different parts had different usage in that area. That's over 100 years old. We're not talking something new here. In the neighborhood businesses out in what we're now referring to as pedestrian residential, right? Yeah, pedestrian residential. There were stores all over this town. Many stores. I've got little orange dots on here. Just to name a few, Bantam Market on Pearl Street is now an auto parts store. There was a convenience store on Pearl Street when I was a kid. Dillon's Market on Buttonwood. It was the second house south of Pearl Street on Buttonwood. Mike Osbacher probably went there as a kid. There was a church, Sand Ridge Road, right by the South Church Street. There was another one on North Grove Street. These are now residents. North Grove Carryout. That was one of the last to go. Bostorff Carryout. That was also serviced by the railroad. Jack Bostorff was a World War II plumber. He'd get shipments in off the railroad. Crim Grocery. If you go to the east side, Crim Grocery later became TO's Campus Corner. And a lot of people that I've talked to said, well, sure, that went there for the university. No, there's newspaper articles referring to that grocery 12 years before the university was even founded. These are neighborhood corner stores. These are usages of the property that have been going on for more than a century. Later, things like a drive-through on the corner of Napoleon Road. That was predominantly residential around there when that went in. There was even an ice cream store on Adams Street. At one time, I owned a property adjacent to that. There's even, I don't know the names, some people might recall here. Corner of Evers and North Prospect, I've told there was a store there at one time. And a lot of these were part of residents. There was one on South Summit Street. Also, as well as undocumented from history, lawyers who had offices in their house. doctors who had offices in their house. Now, granted, if I'm a doctor, am I going to have a huge practice in my house? No. But if I want to set up a small practice in my house, I don't know if that's a conditional use or medical, that kind of thing, but why can't someone do that in their house as long as it's not a full-blown medical? But why should we allow neighborhood commercial and pedestrian residential to continue? This type of land usage and its evolution is not unique to Bowling Green. This is not a social experiment. These land use categories were brought to us by a professional company with a great deal of experience in zoning regulations. There is no one living today in Bowling Green, Ohio, that can claim to predate the type of land usage that we now refer to as neighborhood commercial and pedestrian residential. All of these areas took place earlier. These things were there. And while I'm in no way trying to tell anyone where to live or how to live, there are many factors, including surrounding property usage, which they should consider when they purchase properties. There's a number of properties in this town that I've looked at buying and decided not to buy because of where it's situated. And moving forward, and why we should continue with this, as a society, we need to encourage living neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that are walkable and cyclable with access to daily functions of our life, including businesses found in the proposed neighborhood commercial and pedestrian residential areas. Living neighborhoods will improve our quality of life as well as have a positive impact on the environment. You know, people are out now buying electric cars, hybrid cars, more fuel efficient cars. Well, all we're turning into is a society that has to get in our car and go somewhere. We don't need that. We need living communities. And I know references have been made throughout this whole process about, well, HOAs and things like this, golf courses. I don't live on a golf course because I choose not to live on a golf course. You know, I don't live with an HOA because I choose not to live in an HOA. I want to live in a living community. I thank you all for your time. I think you're doing the right thing.
Thank you, sir. Next.
I apologize if I say your name wrong. Anissa Miller? Okay, great.
Since 1996, I've lived at 124 North Maple Street. I don't know another neighborhood anywhere in the country or in the world, wherever I have traveled, that I love as much as my neighborhood on North Maple. I love that I'm able to walk downtown. I love that I have places to go where I can walk, the library, the post office, the stores, the eateries. That has been very important to me in investing in my neighborhood. In the past year, I happen to have had to spend a great deal of money on maintaining and upgrading my property. And I'm happy to do that because I not only want to enjoy my home, but I'm happy to support quality of home maintenance for my neighborhood. And I would like to see that maintained throughout our historic district. I would like to apologize that I have not succeeded in doing the diligence and learning all about the proposals that are before you. But I do have some concerns that I would like to share. I am primarily concerned that any changes to our zoning hopefully would not wind up at odds with the historical preservation goals that the city also has. I do see deterioration in my neighborhood. I recently reported some peeling paint. I'm sorry, but that really is an environmental hazard. It is a fact in our town, as everyone knows, that when larger, older homes are divided, when they become rentals, or when a single-family home becomes a rental, it is likely to deteriorate. As I was helping my elder brother, who recently moved to town, search for a place to live, I saw many potentially wonderful, small, lower priced types of homes for a single older person. Would have been great for my brother, that had been allowed to basically, never be maintained, never be updated. And, the likelihood that someone is going to invest in that and upgrade it for their family seems very low, when it can just be kept as a rental forever and continue to deteriorate. So I think that's unfortunate. As for the business issue, I have never been bothered by the businesses that are in my immediate neighborhood. We have Long's Dry Cleaners. There's a beauty shop up on the corner of Maple and Conneaut. I still miss the North Grove carryout. It was heartbreaking when we lost that. It was a wonderful establishment. It is helpful to have these things nearby. I was never bothered by the beer works coming in on North Grove Street. Granted, I do not live next door, so I'm not sure how those people feel. But having a place of business to walk to is well and good. My concerns about the densification of our inner city concern deterioration. And I have always understood that one of the goals of making neighborhoods more densely populated is to facilitate public transportation. Well, that is clearly not on the docket here. I remember Mayor Quinn broached a proposal to the university that a town and gown public transit system might be instituted. The university said no, and I am unaware of any further discussion on the topic. That was obviously several administrations ago, so I don't think we are moving towards, having hubs for public transit. So I'm not sure if densification in and of itself is quite the goal that it may be touted to be. I feel that the historic neighborhoods are an asset to our town because even people who don't live there seem to enjoy them. Halloween is approaching. I can tell you that North Maple is the hub of Halloween. Okay, we got the big spooky old houses, we got the big spooky old trees and the leaves falling down. And I run out of my 300th piece of candy after I've given the last half of the children only one piece each, because I can see that it is just going too fast. So I do feel that our historic neighborhoods are an asset. Personally, my great nightmare is that a multiple occupancy building could be approved behind me. I have a very shallow backyard. I adjoin a very deep backyard. I would hate to see that happen, especially after all the money that I have mentioned investing in my house over the past year. So I hope and I trust that these types of concerns will be borne in mind.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Heather?
Yes. Kristen Giblin. And I'm sorry if I said that wrong. Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I don't have a whole lot new to say. I have to agree with a lot of what's been said before. I love living in Bowling Green. I love my neighborhood, even though I have students living next to me right now that like to party till 3 a.m, but I feel like I can talk to them about it. We don't need more multiple family homes. I don't think we need, my issue is with the densification. I don't have that big of an issue with, I personally feel like things are pretty good the way they are right now. I think we have the right amount of businesses. I'm not sure business and residence should mix. Everybody who knows me as the walking lady. I will walk anywhere. I mean, at the drop of a hat. I've never felt like I had to. The only thing missing to me downtown is a department store, but I think that should be downtown on Main Street, not in a neighborhood. The thing that I really object to is the idea of a 60-foot property being split up into two 30-foot properties or more. We don't need more population densification. I think that is a really bad idea. People's homes and livelihoods need to be protected. Our privacy needs to be protected. I sometimes feel like, we live next to a rental now that was allowed to become a rental. I don't think it should have been. It's a crapshoot every year what kind of people we're going to have living next to us. We just never know from year to year what parties we're going to be dealing with and how often we're going to call the police. Mr. McComber brought up the fact that maybe we should be addressing these things with the city council. I will be there. I will definitely be there at city council meetings. I kind of wish that this proposal had not even gotten this far. I don't think it's a good proposal. I think it's a bad idea. I think a lot of people agree with me. And again, I really do hope that you listen to the people who are living in this part of town. I don't know how many of you do, how many of the people who are proposing this do. It seems to me like it's a concept that's been dreamed up by landlords who want to just rent more properties. So I hate to be cynical, but that's how it looks to me. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anybody else, Heather?
Yes. Penny Evans Meyer.
Are there any others after her?
No.
That's it.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. I think just like the other meetings I've come to, that most of us that are here are talking about the pedestrian resident district. And I think that's because many concerns are related to that district, maybe that one only, because most of us that are here live there. But that district is quite large. It covers all 4 wards. And also, when I have looked at other parts of the new proposed zoning code, and I do believe that in the other areas, the institutional, the business, the downtown area, the parks, R1 and R2, largely the wording is that they'll preserve what is. And I think it's uniquely different in our part, pedestrian resident, that there's a couple of goals that are listed, and I have a couple of questions related to those. But first, I wanted to say that the goal of walkability is not just our town, it happens to be our entire state, that there's initiative to be more walkable, more bikeable. But I don't think those things happen by just putting those words into a document. So one question is, if we're in the PR district, I don't know why we can't have a goal as walkability in the entire town, first of all. But since it's in the PR district, I want to know what will make us more walkable. And I need to know more than more people, more buildings. What else would make us more walkable, since that's a goal? So that's a question for you all or for Nolan.
I'm happy to tackle that. The idea that you could get groceries 1 or 2 blocks away instead of driving to Kroger, maybe.
But how do you, why will people walk to the groceries?
Because they have the option to do so. So right now, maybe it's a 2-mile drive to Kroger. Maybe it's raining, right? Or there's a snowstorm would be a better example. You don't want to drive up to Kroger, but you can walk right down the street.
I haven't heard anybody mention a grocery store, but that's an interesting idea. But if we had one, I do a lot of walking and biking, and the one trip I never do walking is groceries.
I think the idea would be, instead of the one big trip, say once or twice a week, do 4 or 5 trips.
But my question is really, how do we make it walkable? Because this initiative, the statewide initiative, and across the country, there are specific things. So let me give you examples. And one thing we're working on is repairing sidewalks. Repaired sidewalks everywhere would make it more comfortable, more safe to walk. If we painted the crosswalks, if we had crosswalks at every intersection, and then if we had law enforcement, that the law related to pedestrians, and we have laws in our state, we always have had them. I don't see them enforced in our town. So pedestrians are at a disadvantage. We wait a long, long time at intersections to cross. And then if it's a busy beginning or the end of the day, we have to kind of take our lives in hand and say, oh, I hope I get across Worcester today. I hope I get across, the busy street I need to get across. It's very difficult. That doesn't make me want to walk, but it would if there were crosswalks and it was enforced. And I don't think it means you have to have a police officer at that corner every day, all year. I think you could have attention to it for a week or two so people know these are the laws. We're going to obey those laws. And then that police attention could drop off and people will, I think, drivers would attend to pedestrians better. And I believe that that's true because I've lived in a couple of cities, large cities, where it was more true than it's here. And I've visited dozens, if not hundreds, of other places where it's almost always true. And I hear people say it when they get back to town. Oh, it was so lovely. I was in Seattle or I was in Perrysburg, Ann Arbor, and I put my toe out in the street and the cars stopped for me. But it doesn't happen here. So we need to do some more work. We can't just say walkability in our document and then put in more buildings. And then those people are going to come to town. Something else someone else mentioned was mass transit. Well, I don't see that we're moving towards mass transit. If we were, that would help walkability. In big cities, in urban neighborhoods, I have in-laws that have lived in New York City their entire work lives in Brooklyn, and they've never had a car because they don't need a car. They can get everywhere they need to go with mass transit, but we're not moving that direction. So whoever is coming, all the new people and us, we all have our cars and we're going to continue to use our cars. But once you put more buildings into our streets, make it more dense in this near-in neighborhood, people are going to bring their cars and they may not walk. They aren't necessarily going to walk just because you've put in those buildings and you've put that word in a document. You need to do some other work. And then two more questions. Why is the 5-foot front setback in our district? Why is that important? And why would that improve our neighborhood?
Heather or Nolan, could you address that question? You know if what the lady is referring to? 5-foot setback?
Yeah, so in the pedestrian residential district, there are some existing properties. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry. So when I was looking at some of the smallest front yard setbacks, there are some that are about 5 feet that exist already. Now I would have to pull up Google Earth to find those properties. I can't list them for you right now. I could list them.
I know there are not very many. Most of our yards are
Correct.
20, 25, which is, we are R2 right now. And that's what the standard is.
Correct. It is not the majority. However, there are some structures that are already that close to the sidewalk. So that was why the proposed front yard setback would be 5 feet. Those properties would continue to be in compliance with this code. They would not become legal non-conforming properties, which would be okay if they did, but they would not. They would be conforming properties. Related, since I'm already speaking, related to walkability, there are so many factors that contribute to walkability of an area. And this zoning document essentially controls what is done on private lands. So a lot of these things that I will list that contribute to walkability are the effect of the public sphere, so those public rights of way. However, some of them are impacted by what's happening on private land. So the presence of benches impacts walkability. The more benches, more people are able to walk. A lot of people can't walk far distances due to knee pain or hip pain, etc. Public bathrooms. A lot of people don't want to walk anywhere because they're scared that they're going to need to urinate and they're not going to have anywhere to do that. The presence of trees. So trees can be in the public realm, in the right of way, but they can also be on private property in people's front yards. And a larger front yard, as you might be getting to, means that there's more likely a chance that there are going to be trees in that front yard. So a front yard of 0 feet, there's no space for a tree. a front yard of 20 feet, there would be more space for a tree. 5 feet, you make a tiny tree or some shrubs. Curb cuts cut down on walkability because as a pedestrian, you have to be crossing areas where vehicles are also crossing, which gives you the perceived feeling of danger. If you're walking out in full sun and there's no awnings or trees to cover you, that's uncomfortable and sweaty, and you'd rather be in your car in air conditioning. So having trees or awnings contributes to shade and cuts down on the heat. Another thing that we look at with walkability is protecting the sidewalk from moving vehicles. So if there are trees, poles, parked vehicles, boulders, something else in between the sidewalk itself and moving vehicles, people feel more protected and it's a more peaceful, pleasant walk. Or if there's just a grass strip there that's separating, that's also good. Lighting for pedestrians, decreasing the car speeds, having protected crosswalks where people don't feel like they're taking their life in their own hands to cross a street. But a lot of those take place in the public realm. Something that happens in the private lots is having destinations that are close by. So if you're lucky enough to live a quarter mile from your destination, you may walk there. Now that destination may, within a quarter mile of people walking there, may have, I'm just making up a number, 300 people living within a quarter mile. But if that same business could have 600 people within a quarter mile, that business could do more business and could maybe survive a little bit better. So having more people within a quarter mile walk or a half mile walk of a destination improves that destination's viability for a walking customer base. And so when you have one thing that makes a place walkable and a destination walkable is that it's designed to be approached by a pedestrian. If you were approaching a grocery store like Kroger and you have to walk across 600 feet of parking lot, you know that this store was never designed to be approached by a pedestrian. And so that's another architectural feature or a design feature on private land that contributes to walkability. In reference to mass transit is generally subsidized. And if mass transit can pick up, say, mass transit's expenses are the bus itself and the driver, right? So if mass transit can pick up more riders per minute or per hour of that driver's time and per mile for the wear and tear on the vehicle itself, then it will require less subsidy.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think you're going beyond Bowling Green, way beyond Bowling Green. No one said that we can have mass transit. That's not in our future. But I also wanted to just stop you and ask you, is in our zone, are preserving trees and planting more trees and maintaining trees, is that in this code? Are public benches in this code? Or preserving grassy park areas, are those in this code in our district?
So the benches are not in there. No, benches would be generally part of the public right of way. So that would be controlled by the city rather than private landowners. In terms of trees, I need to look that up. I forget here.
There definitely is a tree requirement, more so than we have now. It's in a couple different spots.
Okay.
There's very extensive buffering too that we don't have now.
I'm most interested in how it pertains to the district pedestrian resident, because I believe that's where most.
It's not based on per district. It is really just a tree requirement that if Nolan finds it, we can read that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I just had a couple other questions before I'll sit down. The other goal in our district is affordable housing. And so I'm curious to know how, that's another thing that needs a lot of background to it. You can't just say, okay, developer, you purchase this property, do what you want. And then in the end, why would it be affordable? Because people that build places need to make money. Right now, we have a very severe shortage of materials. They're hard to get. They're expensive. All those costs are up. I have a shortage of workers. So how are these houses or buildings for business or whatever, how are they going to be for sure affordable to a new group of people that couldn't afford houses right now? And I'll just add, I thought I had one other question. I think that's it. That's it. I'll sit down.
Can I say something about parking? So I live in PR district and I walk everywhere too. I've seen you around walking. There is no study I read which says that reducing parking requirement increase mobility. There is no study out there which can say, I'm talking about causality, that if you have reduced parking space, if you make better sidewalks, if you have more trees, all that stuff, people will walk more. There is no study. People walk more because they just walk more. And there is an attitude change which is needed, which is not in this town. And I agree with you. No, there is. So there, when we take all these things together, when we put in a model, okay, I'm sure if I plant more trees, I have a better sidewalk, I have more businesses together, blah, blah, blah. It is for sure not a certainty that it will increase mobility. People will walk more. There is no study out there because it's an attitude and we know how difficult it is to change attitudes. And this town doesn't have that attitude. I know. I mean, I walk on the main street, I have a baby and I have a dog. So I have two good things to stop people. People still don't stop. So but there are things happening, right? But there is attitudes do change if we keep pushing for positive change, right? So we have to for sure make better sidewalks where people can park. We have to make sure that we enforce laws in which people feel safe to walk and to ride their bike. So, and we need to, so we are doing that. We have to, right? So like downtown says bikes are like vehicles and consider that too. And there is an attitude change and we're going in the right directions, but the document cannot make people suddenly walk more. There's no magic document which can make that because it will take time. And we are doing some things to do it, right? So I totally understand your concern about, walkability, but I do want to also add to about more affordability housing. There is something in the document which is ADUs, which is auxiliary dwelling unit, and that does increase more affordable housing into the neighborhoods. So there are studies out there where ADU helps into having more affordable housing. Like it's like having kind of converting, having another, I will say having a garage which you can convert into a 1-bedroom apartment or having another unit out there. And so that does increase the affordable housing options. And also what it will do is, so then there's another thing of bed and breakfast as well that can reduce the pressure on the housing.
So we can't hear you if you're not at the microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to remind everyone that there is an initiative. It's a statewide initiative, Walk Bike Ohio. And there are communities in our state, a lot of them, that are doing some very interesting programs. And if you look at active transportation under Ohio, you could learn about those. And some of them are very similar to us, and some of them are cities. But I think we all could learn some things by what other Ohio communities are doing. And I think, I understand what you're saying about walkability, that it's a hard thing, but I think there are things that communities are doing now that actively encourage it.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to add one more thing. Again, I just want to add a fact. So I heard the 25-foot front yard setback is the current front yard setback. That is correct. However, it is not correct for neighborhoods pre-1975. There is something called an average front yard setback in our code that basically you take an average of a block. Let's say one house is 10 feet back, one house is 5 feet, one is 20 feet back. We are to calculate that average, and an addition in the front of the house, for example, would have to meet that average front yard setback. So it was meant to give some flexibility to homes built before our zoning code. So again, I'm just putting a fact out there that 25-foot minimum, yes, it's in R2, but not if you're in these older neighborhoods and there's an average. So again, if there's any questions about that, let me know. But I think again, I'm all about facts right now. And I wanted to make sure you knew that that is how it is today.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
Planning
That-
Commission.
I'm sorry.
I did find the section on street trees. Would you like for me to read that section to you?
Sure.
Okay, so for street trees, except for lots in the central business district or the Bowling Green Gateway District, which have parking areas fronting Main Street or Worcester Street. So these areas have their own street tree requirements. So that's why this section does not apply to them. Any new development or an expansion of an existing building by more than 20% of gross floor area, street trees shall be planted at a rate of 1 tree per 40 linear feet of frontage. A lot with less than 40 feet of frontage shall be required a minimum of 1 street tree. The street trees may be planted in designated tree boxes within the right of way, or may be planted on the private lot within 3 feet of the front lot line. Tree plantings shall not be placed in the vision clearance triangle. That's to prevent cars from getting in accidents as they turn corners. Let's see. They need to be, we give specifications that the tree needs to be planted, that they need to have a diversity of species, they need to be free of disease, they need to be maintained by the landowner, and let's see, and that the preservation of street trees that already exist on site can count towards the requirement of providing street trees. So if you keep a tree that's already there, that can take the place of one of these requirements. And there is an exemption if for this requirement, if planting a tree would cause a hazard, the city may exempt a lot from planting a tree, but otherwise it's 1 tree per 40 feet of frontage.
Okay, thank you, Nolan. That's a little bit of
You're welcome.
additional facts to the situation. I knew in that document somewhere there was some language like that. I couldn't have told you where it was. What section was that, by the way?
It's page 76.
Page 76.
150.77.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I'm off mute. Again, along Worcester and Maine and within the Bowling Green Gateway, there are different requirements.
Right. Okay, at this point, I think I'm going to close the public hearing and we'll move into our work session to get through the remainder of items that we have on our agenda tonight to hopefully wind up our review of this proposed zoning code. So the first item was to talk about section 150.98 about conditional uses and what the planning director needs to find in order to approve a conditional use. Will, you had a suggestion. You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. Yeah, this is section 150.98. I think there were 2 tasks from our last discussion. One was to modify the language to change it from at least something that could be read to be prescriptive for the planning director, that if they found certain criteria, they must issue a conditional use approval. And the second was to evaluate whether to include a quality of life component. As you can see by what I circulated prior to the meeting, I was bamboozled by defining quality of life in a way that I was sort of satisfied with, and that others I shared it with were perhaps satisfied with. And I do think it's important to think about, and it ultimately also perhaps feels like a political question I kick to council to properly evaluate and define that item. So what I propose to do is to strike 2 words and add 3, which would make it clear that the planning director must find certain criteria before a conditional use approval is granted, but that it is not if this, then that.
Okay, so your motion is to recommend that city council amend the original section 150.98 as you described there, adding 3 words and eliminating 2. And further recommend that city council consider whether to integrate a quality of life criteria to that section.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Any comment about that proposal?
Just real quick, I reviewed some of what Will had initially prepared and drafted. So it's very tricky to find an objective quality of life measurement, and that's the crux of it. Can't just say quality of life and everybody be on the same page. So I support where Will's at. I think that's as far as we can get it.
Yeah.
Sounds more like, so going through there, okay, so you get through this conditional use down to the bottom, and we're going to change the language that says if then, which I agree with, that, okay, because you pointed out right there that, okay, we hit all these, now we get our conditional use. Well, not necessarily, that takes away, more authoritative powers that be. But quality of life, the way you framed it makes it almost sounds like exterior effect of said use. So, okay, we get through all this. Okay, then do we have to take a look at, again, it's probably just as nebulously quantifiable as anything, but it sounds to me more like we need to take into account in one way, shape, or form how this is going to really affect neighbors. Right?
Same thing everybody's
been looking for this whole time we've been doing this. And, whether or not that goes back to hearings yet again, I don't know, but it just, quality of life seems, as you say, nebulous, but having the external effect be a thing to consider.
And I will point out, for what it's worth, that we had a lot of comments to that, and everybody left as we came to discuss it.
I was just saying that, like, we were getting to the absolute crux of what they're talking about right in this language, and everybody took off. But
and what makes it tough is in any neighborhood on one block, 5 people think their quality of life means I shouldn't have the coffee shop. 5 people think better quality of life means I should, right?
Right.
And it goes both ways. And super different. When we walked out, the last thing I said to you is, I'm like, good luck. It was the last thing.
I think we're asking an awful lot of the planning director.
Paragraph, and I think it's really tough.
I'll say, Abhishek actually gave me some really good input, pointed to some of the principles. I tried. I felt like I got every part of it, other than actually defining quality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easy to talk about, okay, it shall not have a material negative impact on the quality of life, but on the immediately adjacent properties. I mean, you can get there. It's just that, what do we mean by quality of life? And to me, I guess I went around enough times that I thought to myself, this is appropriate for the elected official to weigh in to what. Not that I don't have my own private thoughts, right? But can't really impose them on you all. And even if I did, I couldn't impose it on.
I think we're asking the planning director to do above and beyond the call of duty, to ask her or him, whomever the planning director would happen to be 10 years, 20 years from now, to define quality of life and judge on that. I think that's asking way too much of someone. I even think it might be too much asking of city council, but I wouldn't say that for the public.
I did some background research on this because I took it on me to find how to define quality of life. I found 2 or 3 papers I shared with Will. One of the paper was back in 1999. They did a quality of life for Toronto, what citizens thought of what it means to be quality of life. I wish I had a printout of the paper. I'm not going to office these days, so. But it was intrinsic and extrinsic principles. So intrinsic is like, I feel happy, I feel safe, I feel nobody's bothering me, and extrinsic is I feel healthy. So like this kind of comes to the 7 BG principles. There are, I can walk to a green space, fitness and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of research around this, but it's kind of can be clubbed to 2 things. I think BG 7 principles does it. I agree with Will that this could be a political question where citizens, city council can take a decision on it. But there is extrinsic and intrinsic ways to define quality of life. There is.
All righty. So the motion is on the floor. It was seconded by Judy, right?
No.
There wasn't no motion. No,
I don't think he
motion.
made the motion.
Okay.
Well,
You
you-
the motion
I
as
think
is, Will?
he suggested you make, that you were.
Happy to move. I recommend that city council amend the original section 150.98 I have here is modified below. Do you happen to have the email with the text?
Yeah.
Yes, Bob's got it.
Yeah.
Okay. As modified by my email held by Bob, and further recommend that City Council consider whether to integrate a quality of life criterion to the planning director's review of conditional.
Okay, is there a second?
I second it.
Have a check second. Jamie, you can call the roll.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-3. If I counted right. As long as we're talking about your motions, Will, or that one, and you had two others, we might as well put those into the discussion right now before we move on further. You had a second email regarding community garden. Want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I was actually recently traveling and I ran across some community gardens, which are just lovely. I reminded me that this current zoning code draft doesn't have anything on community gardens. And I thought it should be in there and certainly something that City Council should think about. And so I clicked around, did a little bit of digging, found that the Ohio EPA has some materials on community gardens. So I stole their definition of that. And I drafted this motion to facilitate the creation of community gardens in this community as a conditional use in certain.
And I was talking to Heather about this particular email before the meeting a little bit and confirmed with me that this is an unregulated area currently. There's nothing illegal about having a community garden in Bowling Green. Perfectly legal. It's just an unregulated area.
I would think so.
So your suggestion is to
Regulate it?
regulate it in a positive way to make it clear that it's a legal use.
That it's something that we like and want to encourage and grow in a certain way.
Anybody have any comments over that proposal?
At least from your comment, I mean, I prefer that it be regulated, unregulated. Yeah. So can you give me some context on size, location, like in some of the research you did? Can you give me a little context so I can get an idea of how that would look in our town?
Yeah, so I'll do two things. One, I'll say it depends. And I can give you a rough outline. I would also suggest Abhishek might have some really good ideas about this because I think you know a lot more than I do about community gardens.
Okay.
So a perfect example, I live on North Main Street and just behind me is Ridge Park. And I walk every day, not every day now, people that, but anyway, let me come to the point. So to BGSU, and I see this huge piece of green space, and it has a small play area, which has ample of sun, which can have a small community garden right there. I mean, we're talking about 5x3 beds, so 5 foot by 3 foot beds, 10 of them. And that space can have some tomatoes, some stuff which people around the area can have. They can grow. People can adopt one. So I can say I'm taking one 5x3 bed and I will take care of this all summer, and all the produce I can take home, or I can just give it to people or to a food pantry, right? So we have a couple of food pantries here, one in BGSU, Brown Bag. There's churches do. So, and that space can be kind of seen like a more living space for people to come and, to hang out. Eventually that space can have, community yoga, can have a picnic,
Goat yoga.
Something like that. Could also have non-speaker jazz on green, so it can be reimagined into so many things where people can just pluck tomatoes and, get some stuff. I don't know. I mean, it just is. And there could be butterflies there. There could be birds there. There could be a whole lot of more life there. So I think about it every day when I walk. So that's one example. There are houses which are in a very bad situation. And some of the other cities have done it. Residents around here have bought that house, taken down that house if it can't be repaired, and put a garden. Or bought land and put a garden.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It
Yeah.
sounds like we're backing into a section of the code here that we have in it.
That's right. It's not there
right.
today.
It's not there.
Yeah, I mean,
I have
don't have
included,
anything. Go ahead, no.
in a lot of codes that I've written in Ohio, I have included what I call neighborhood agriculture. And this is small scale agriculture. Some cities permit the products produced there to be sold. Some say that the products can't be sold, but it's just a smaller version of agriculture. And it's something that we include in a lot of codes that's not in this draft, but is quite common.
And I mean, we're not going to define it tonight, but the whole idea is to recommend to city council at least something to
Right.
consider and
So-
flesh out.
With this and the next one, I mean, I do define it here, but it is premised on the idea that city council would include it in zoning. It would take a subsequent, my perspective, it would take a subsequent ordinance from city council to define what those rules are.
Yeah.
And then that would be then, so from a planning director perspective, right? You don't get a conditional use application just as regardless. But they'd have to match. Or I am assured that there are members of city council that have up such an effort. So my thought is, let's have a zoning code that actually facilitates that versus something that you have to create.
I'll second Will's motion.
Did you make the?
I did not make the motion. I'll make it briefly.
I'm sorry.
Speed you along here, Will.
I so move and recommend.
You better make a motion. I just seconded something.
That's right. Recommend that city council include new definition of community garden in Article 7 as described later in the sentence, and recommend that city council amend the use table in section 150.41 to include community garden as a conditional permitted use in the PR district as well as the R1 and R2 zones. Community garden is defined as an area of land managed and maintained by a group of individuals to grow and harvest food crops and or non-food ornamental crops, such as flowers, for personal or group use, consumption, sale, or donation.
Now,
Now you can
This is
second
the
it.
most anticlimactic second ever. I'll second that motion.
okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Jamie, you can call the roll.
Yes.
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 Okay, motion passes 8-0. We'll move on to your third email and topic, Will, regarding backyard chickens. I don't know if you know the background here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Bob and I know the background.
We did have a lengthy discussion, took months, about backyard chickens about 10 years ago or so, I would guess.
Right.
It was when I was on city
Yeah.
council, and I haven't been on council for 4 or 5 years, and it wasn't right near the end of my tenure, somewhere in the middle. That puts it at about 10 or 12 years ago. Judy.
I was on the zoning board at the time, and a petitioner came and
Wanted
the
a
zoning
variance.
board turned it down. Yes, and then it went to city council, and they, after a long period of discussion, turned it down.
Now I'm not particularly against revisiting the topic at this point in time. You know, it's been at least 10 years since it was discussed before. People may feel a little differently about it now than they did. We've got different people on city council. So I'm not opposed to revisiting the topic. I did notice that in your motion, Will, that you emailed to us, you don't really take a position that city council should or shouldn't adopt allowing backyard chickens. You just want them to consider it.
I had a sense that we might get to 8:20 tonight and be in approximately this spot, and thought that this was not something we'd previously considered. I just didn't want, we have the opportunity to if forcibly encourage city council to consider certain topics. And this is one that, as we revamp the zoning after 50 years, I think
I do have some concern that if city council considers backyard chickens as part of the proposed
There.
zoning code, that it may lengthen the process of adopting the zoning code considerably. I would rather see them revisit the topic separate and
Yeah.
apart from the proposed zoning
Yeah.
code. So I'm
Can
not
I
against,
add something?
go ahead, Nolan. You wanted
Yeah,
to
so I
say
have two
something?
things that I wanted to add. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, so in your language of community garden, you mentioned food crops. I'm not a farm boy myself, but I would encourage you to say, if you were trying to ban animals, livestock from such uses, maybe adding the word vegetated or vegetative food crops. I don't know if crops specifically is linked to vegetation versus animal. So that was one comment. The other one is that in our current definition of accessory use, this is page 105, accessory use, all activities that occur within an accessory structure of more than 100 square feet of gross floor area that are incidental to the principal use of the land or principal structure on the lot. An accessory use includes outdoor living uses, home occupations, and household agriculture. So I almost, if you're going to go along the lines of encouraging city council, the term household agriculture is not defined in this code. So adding specificity to that phrasing in the definition of accessory use may relate to this conversation. I just wanted to point that out in the definition of accessory use, page 105.
I would perhaps amend my motion to say that recommend that city council consider whether household agriculture as used in the definition of accessory use includes backyard chickens, something to that effect. I actually had missed that particular language, and that's a glaring issue that is waiting to be exploited would be one word. Yes.
Enacted.
Yeah. So I think either way, we should probably get clarity on what that means if it's not defined.
Household agriculture. Okay, let's go back to your proposal. Again, that's the background to the situation, that it was discussed at considerable length a number of years ago. And I started to say I am concerned about holding up the adoption of the code for that topic, and would rather that it be considered
It's a
separate and
separate
apart
issue.
from the proposed zoning code. Although I'm not against the concept, I'm not really in favor of what you're proposing for that reason.
I would say to clarify my position, then I having not quite made the motion yet, other than circulate the email, I wouldn't make it in this way. So based on Nolan's input, I would instead say I recommend that city council clarify whether household agriculture as used in the definition of accessory use includes backyard chickens. They're going to have to do something with it either way. This just tees up the particular issue.
Okay. So do you want to are you making a motion?
I can. Yeah. So motion is to recommend city council consider whether the use of the term household agriculture in the definition of accessory use includes backyard chickens.
Could you just leave the motion without saying includes backyard chickens? Did they just define livestock?
I could, but I just like to mean what I say. And that's what I,
Really?
that's what I mean. And everyone can watch online. So I think they know what we mean.
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Yes.
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 No.
Okay. Jamie, could you, for my benefit, read back what that motion was again? Yeah, I think that's it. Household agriculture. And that motion passed 7-1. Okay, with that item done, I believe the next item, when I find my agenda,
Right here.
is height restriction. I know that's something that, Mark, you've wanted to talk about a couple of times along the way here.
Yep.
And you've been very patient into waiting
No.
until tonight.
There's a lot to talk about.
Okay,
It's okay.
well, we want to get done tonight.
Yeah, and I don't think
Possibly
that
you to
it's,
start with.
yeah, and I think that, you know, I've discussed on a couple occasions and used examples of, you know, other development that's happened that the restrictions on height have made it difficult for development. It's turned development away, and I think that it's made it tough in a lot of situations. So, you know, I would like to hear other comments, but in particular, you know, I feel that, and I had a question for Nolan specifically, that in Nolan, have you been involved in situations where a city fully removed height restrictions in, let's just say, like the neighborhood commercial area? Were there any issues or things that came out of specifically removing those height restrictions?
The quick answer is not yet. So that's proposed in several cities that I'm working in right now.
Bless you.
Some cities prefer to have a height restriction just to have one. So they put on there 200 feet or 250 feet simply to have one, not thinking that any building is actually going to reach that height. Others remove it altogether, thinking that the market is going to control for it and no one's going to build something that tall. However, the ones that institute a height restriction just to have one are fearful that somebody may erect a tower kind of against what the market would determine economical, simply to have the tallest tower in town or to put a sign at the top of that nature. So different cities that I work with have different opinions on it. But for those, the short story is those that I've worked with that have gotten rid of height restrictions or made them very high haven't had a high tower move in. But I haven't given it enough time also. So that's why I said the word yet.
And in those situations where they may have moved to remove the height restrictions, was there, what was the check and balance, right? Is it the planning director? Is it city council? So, you know, if a developer comes in and says, hey, I want to put a hotel up, and I think my market studies say that it can be 8 stories high, I can keep it full, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so it's not a free for all where anybody can do anything they want. Where does the check and balance fall, and where should it fall?
So if there were no height restrictions and they wanted to build an 8-floor building, they could do that. I don't know that I'm understanding the question. Sometimes, you know, a lot of cities are using height planes, and this is to protect adjacent landowners from being shadowed out or feel like there's a behemoth right next to them glaring down at them. So a height plane would be a diagonal plane, say it is at a slope of 2 units rise over 1 unit horizontal. And so no building can exceed that. So if you want to build a higher tower, you have to have further setbacks for that part of the tower that's higher. So to not shadow out as many surrounding properties. I don't know that I fully understand your question. Can you read this?
Go ahead. I mean,
So, and I would defer to, you know, to Heather to help me out a little bit here too. When I look at the summary table on page 37 and 38 for the different zones and the different districts, and, you know, outside of the residential stuff, you know, it's all over the place, right? So where have these height restrictions come from? Is it just generally accepted practice, Heather, or where have these come from?
Well, I think if you rewind back to when zoning became a tool for cities, it was because of light, air, safety. That's really where they came from. So if I have a house that's 25 foot tall, I don't particularly probably want one that's 60 foot tall next to me because I can't look out my window and see, you know, at all. You'd have very little light. So there really is a history of that. I know a lot of times we talked about making sure our ladder trucks can reach buildings. There's always been that safety concern.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I heard us somewhat jokingly mention that we thought some of the height restrictions were because we didn't want to cover up the view of the courthouse, right? Like, and I've heard that over the years too. And, you know, those aren't, in my opinion, great reasons for restricting height. I feel strongly, and again, I can only use the examples that I've been involved with, but in both the Market Square development, where we've got the Jimmy John's and the mixed use with apartments above it, you know, that was restricted to 2 levels. And then same thing happened where I call it the boxcar building, but where Tropical Smoothie is, and we've got apartments above that. So we redeveloped both of those. And in both cases, we would have been able to have built more space up, another 2 or 3 levels. And it's something that, quite frankly, if we didn't live here and we didn't think that it was a positive improvement for our city, I probably wouldn't have done the development. Financially, it's not great. I mean, it's fine, but it certainly would have been a lot better if we could have went up another story or 2. So if this is somebody else other than Mark Remus or my family that lives here that's doing this development, that may never have happened.
So I personally feel like, Mark, that we've grown a lot as a community since your developments.
Sure.
And you know, we've had several discussions about that. We've redid our future land use map. We've did the community action plan. I feel like we've made a lot of progress since those scenarios happened. And I really think this code is trying to address that. I think one of the biggest concerns in our office that we get sometimes is the industrial really being tight when it comes to height. We rarely have that with commercial or mixed use. And I think this really allows us that flexibility. I think how we measure the height, we've addressed that where it's more flexible. So I feel like we are getting to where you want us to go, but still having some parameters, because at the end of the day, we're still Bowling Green. And I think people still do appreciate that small town feel. And we're not a Chicago or New York City. Not that I'm comparing apples to apples, but I still think a little bit of scale here is appropriate. And I think that's where the height comes in a little bit. I don't think we're going crazy with this, but I do think we're allowing for certain districts to have that flexibility that's necessary for their operations. And I think early on we had did the IE zone and made that taller. based on setback. So really there isn't a maximum in the IE. If you're going to basically set back your buildings further, you can go taller with no maximum. So I think the code has tried to,
Sure.
I think, be flexible in that realm, if that makes
And I
sense.
agree with you. I mean, you and I have talked about this a
Mhm.
lot. I feel like we've made better strides. I don't feel like we're there yet. And you've gotten my opinion on a lot of the items in zoning code update, and I think it's the right direction. I'd hate to see us not move forward with a lot of the things that we've all put a lot of time and effort in. But the height restrictions, in my opinion, are still something I think we have a little bit of room on. And I'd like to hear what the rest of the commission thinks as well.
I'm with you, Mark. I basically agree with everything you said. I do get, I honestly, a week ago or two, I probably leaned toward just eliminate every height restriction across the board and be done with them. I get the scale discussion. I don't know where that I exactly fall, a perfect definition, but yeah. I mean, on one hand, you don't want a monstrosity built in the, I don't know, right next to 2-3 story buildings, some 10-story building. But the reality of it is, it's not going to happen. The market will dictate, and that's just not realistic. So eventually, sure, things get a little taller and then a little taller, and sure, maybe, when we're all long gone, it gets there. But I just think being realistic, I think it's an unnecessary restraint on some quality new development with the other changes in the gateway and so forth. As things develop and get redeveloped, we'll have new buffers and all the other fun stuff that comes along with what's in this code. So pointing toward getting rid of them.
I know the idea of not having any height restrictions still makes me nervous.
Sure.
I don't feel real comfortable.
And
with
it
that.
does me too. I mean, I specifically asked, where's the check and balance?
Yeah.
How do we have a check and balance? Because it shouldn't be a free for all. So Bob, I definitely agree with that. I do.
Heather, do you get many variance requests for height?
No.
No, we
You know,
don't.
it happens
And Judy's
quite
probably a
lot.
longer
No,
term
we
expert
don't.
than me.
And the zoning board of appeals is always an avenue that if you want to go higher for a particular building, that you can come to and discuss it with us. So,
I think that's kind of an issue, and not to mention the fire department's not going to want.
yeah, they're not going to want.
buildings either.
Yeah.
So I think there's a process that's in place for those specialized developments that you're talking about, Mark. There, maybe you could come and have a reasonable discussion.
Yeah.
with the board. So just my opinion. I do like the fact that we have height restrictions. I think we need them. Maybe they could change a little bit.
I think the
And
last
like-
time we discussed it at all, since in my tenure, was on the proposed the hotel.
Mhm.
It came up. I don't know if we actually discussed it, if that was an issue at all, but or it was as proposed came in where it did because of the height restrictions. Either way, we touched on it briefly once in the last 4-ish years.
And the reality is that, like Judy said, there haven't been a lot of variance requests. I mean, it's only going to happen if there's new development, right?
Right.
And there hasn't been a lot. I think we need more. I want more, which is why I want a relaxed code if and when that happens. Even the Market Square project, that was a 6-year process for us. It took us that long to buy enough property to be able to do what we did. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but there's opportunities from that spot as we go east, or consolidation of properties where we could develop. And again, I personally would like it to be relaxed from where it is today.
And keeping in mind too, if we have height restrictions wherever they are, that's what any developer is going to look at before, when they come in out of town, right? If they see, oh, they got a 40 foot onto the next one, or they've got a 30 foot here onto the next one, as opposed to what the right answer is. I'm not at obviously just yet, but I think it does make a lot of sense to open the door, and if there's, even if it's an asterisk on all these, subject to review, and there's some kind of wiggle room allowed. These are the numbers that are in the code, but if there's something built in that allows that mechanism to prove to the planning director that it's a good idea, that might be worth considering.
Think it residential particular district that has, again, by ideal, we want students there. Four banger houses, or do we want something a little bigger?
Sure.
Is that where that okay? Couple take commerce, maybe see what Max here. We got the oh, that right.
Mark, how tall is Market Square?
2 stories. I couldn't tell you the height.
Because
That's-
I honestly,
I know.
for me, I read the numbers. Basketball, right? Like I'm not sure how tall things, but that'd be a good reference.
And it would, and I don't have that answer. I don't know how all that specific coding. 2 stories.
Well, in the interest of moving things along, Mark, let me
I'm
ask
sorry?
if you, in the interest of moving things along,
Sure.
let me ask, do you have any motion to make regarding this topic?
I do. I mean, I wanted feedback because I don't want to just push a motion. Initially I would say, Bob, that, in the neighborhood commercial, in the central business, I was leaning towards coming in with removing any height restriction, and then let the developer dictate what he or she thinks they can do with whatever the check and balance is.
How about this as a compromise, that we recommend to city council that they closely review the height
Yeah.
restrictions in the proposed document, to determine if they want to possibly eliminate,
Alter them.
modify, or keep them as is.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. And I hope that the way that I've gone about this conversation tonight indicates that I'm not about just a free for all. I don't think that it should just be whatever developers want to do. I do care about the neighbor next door, about people that are driving through and how it looks. So Bob, I do care, and I think that your suggestion is great, and I'm totally fine with it.
Okay.
If that is your motion,
Yeah,
I'll-
Before that's a motion, real quick, do we want to direct city council to any specific zones? Like everything you said in
No,
particular?
No.
It's not my intention to direct them to particular zones. Let them review all the zones.
Fair enough. Okay.
So I am making them, go ahead, Nolan.
And Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think according to your current code, the limited commercial district does not have a height restriction. General commercial does have height restriction, and the central business district has a height restriction of 60 feet.
Under the current code, you're saying?
That's what
Neighborhood
I'm saying.
commercial has a minimum and a maximum.
There's a min and a max.
Yeah.
Not under the proposed. I'm seeing under the code in effect now in Bowling Green. Is that what you're saying, Heather?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you're talking about what's proposed. There's height regulations across the board.
Yeah.
In the current code,
okay.
all districts.
Okay.
I'm making a motion that we recommend to city council that they closely review the height restrictions in the proposed zoning code to determine if they're best eliminated, modified, or remain as proposed.
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. You get all that down, Jamie? Okay. Moving. Yeah, Judy seconded. Yeah, recommend this, in the proposed zoning code to determine if they should be eliminated, modified, or remain as is. I think that covers all the bases. All right. Go ahead and call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, motion passes 8-0. Moving right along. Next, I hope you all brought with you the document that Abhishek put together for us some weeks ago now. It is entitled Public Comments Classified into Different Categories. And I thought this document was helpful in reviewing all the comments that we've received from the public. And I thought we should at least go through it, not to every single comment, but sort of go through it section by section as quickly as we can to see if there's anything else, if anybody wants to make any comments in regard to those comments, or if you think there's anything else we need to do in regard to those comments. So the first section of Abhishek's document talks about process. And we've got 3 comments there. And does anybody have any comments about those things?
I think you addressed these last meeting. Yeah. But for the most part, it's why is nobody talking about this being public, et cetera. I think you addressed that very well at our previous meeting.
Okay. I don't have anything to add there. Does anybody else?
Yeah, we did a good job.
Okay. Let's move on to house value then. One of the things I noticed, I think it's in here, is there's a couple of comments that essentially say, is my house value going to go up or down, and tell me by how much? That's the unanswerable question. There is no answer to that
I
question.
live it every day. It is impossible.
Yeah.
For
You don't have a magic wand, Bob?
There's,
No,
it's not an exact science.
But just because somebody asks a question that can't be answered doesn't mean that we should not go ahead with the proposed zoning. So
Bob, I actually thought in one of the prior meetings, you did a very good job of challenging, I think, the premises of some of these questions.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we're just, if you start from the premise of certain types of businesses are bad for the neighborhood, then you naturally reach the conclusion that home values will go down, right? And
right,
if someone has that position, then they're not about convincing.
right,
You start from different.
right. Okay. Effects of zoning on neighborhoods. Certainly the proposed zoning code has a concept that could affect the neighborhoods in which there is pedestrian residential zoning. So the concept is to possibly integrate over time some number of small businesses into those neighborhoods where they currently don't exist. And certainly some people that have come to the meetings and voiced their opinion object to that concept. So there's no denying that there is a potential effect on some neighborhoods. How it will work out, we don't know in advance, but we have tried to take some precautions to make it more likely than not that there will be a favorable outcome. We've done that through limiting the uses in neighborhoods in the pedestrian residential district. We've limited the uses to a relatively small number of things. Somebody can't just plop down and put down whatever kind of business they want to. But this is a concept that has been utilized in a number of other towns and cities in the country. It's a pretty, I want to say, current thing in urban planning. Certainly the intent here is to improve the quality of life in our city. But the proof is in the pudding. We'll see if this is adopted as time goes on. We'll see how it works out. It does cross my mind that this proposed zoning code is a big enough thing that not everything in it will probably turn out exactly the way we want to on first blush. It may need to be amended as time goes on. There's nothing wrong with that. So we'll certainly closely monitor on what's working and what's not working, or I think city council will closely monitor what's working and not working and consider amendments as it deems to be appropriate. So that's my thoughts on that topic. Anybody else want to say anything?
I think you summed it up well.
Okay, housing shortage. Got a whole bunch of comments on that, I think. More comments on that? No, I'm sorry. There's not that many comments on that. I missed a heading down there. We got 4 comments on that. These all seem to talk about allowing 3 and 4 unit dwellings in the pedestrian residential district.
These are actually saying that they want 3 and 4 unit dwellings in that. Both 17 and 18 say that in there.
Yeah, right.
4 comments.
Yeah, 4 comments. It's
crazy cool.
Anybody have any?
I don't know that there's anything in here that changes the housing shortage overnight. I think that it's a national issue. It's a state issue, right? It's not just a Bowling Green. I don't know what else we can do.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We do have a lot of comments under the topic business operations in neighborhoods.
Yeah. We've heard a lot of comments.
Audience members have talked about that at great length. We've talked about it among ourselves at great length.
It'll start scratching. I'm gonna start scratching and picking your.
I don't know what else to say about that particular topic that hasn't already been said.
I think we made some adjustments that address that in our comments. So there are recommendations.
Okay. Then we get to some topics in which there were not many comments. Chickens, next one on the list. We've addressed that tonight. Bed, it says bread and breakfast, but I think you meant bed and breakfast.
I was going to say.
Check. We addressed that particular topic also by greatly increasing the number of days that someone can stay at a bed.
Yeah.
So we already talked.
So that's
But we haven't talked about bread and breakfast. So.
yeah, bread and breakfast. Just one comment on rental properties. I guess the answer is there a section for rentals, both long-term and short-term use. I don't think they're.
Kind of goes with that previous though.
Well, it kind of
Yeah.
goes with
Yeah.
the bed and breakfast,
Yeah.
yeah.
No.
Green space, there are, as Nolan was pointing out earlier tonight, Heather also, there are quite a bit of regulations in the proposed zoning code about buffering, planting trees, that kind of thing. I seem to remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, that if someone does open a business in a pedestrian residential district, that to the extent their property abuts residential use, there's quite a fairly extensive requirements about fencing and buffering.
I would have to double check. There's a lot of different scenarios listed in the new code. You'd almost have to look at the specific use regulations depending on that use to see if there's any criteria, and then also the buffering.
Specifically, this one though, I think is referring to pollinators and native species and I guess more specific. Greenery, shrubbery, whatever. Yeah.
Community garden will do it.
That's true.
I think it's interesting concept. Very much my perspective. They want to include native plant requirement.
And then the last comment was about parking. It says, please drastically reduce the required parking. Certainly the proposed zoning code does that.
Yep.
I think the person that wrote that comment would be pretty pleased with that portion of the proposed zoning code. And with that, I think we move on to anything else the commission members might suggest we need to talk about before voting on finalizing. Covered everything we need to cover.
I did want to circle back just quickly. I know it's getting late, but there a comment tonight, I believe it was from Rose Drain, about the electric signs in the
Yeah.
yard district. And I think, they basically, my note was, should we look at, or should we just potentially eliminating, because those, like, I get, that sounded like a real hassle. And I kind of get where she's coming from, especially for trying to strike at least a little bit of a middle ground, or whatever you want to call it, to make businesses within residential areas more palatable. That might be.
I would add 3-foot. Still be bright when it's dark out.
Sure.
I don't know how bright that is.
It's not a lot, to be honest with you, but it's,
Nolan, what would you think if we added a statement to the proposed zoning code, or in the appropriate spot, that electronic signs are not permitted in the pedestrian residential district?
Right. Yeah, I think that would decrease the number of complaints. Yeah, I think that would be fine. I don't think that would be out of the ordinary to do, especially considering how many side streets there are in that district.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
Are you okay with that, Heather?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I could almost argue a step further that you could look at non-illumination, but then to a certain extent. But no, I do agree they get very bright.
As an alternative comment or view, we're talking about an updated code that is encouraging businesses to be in these neighborhoods. And I can say that our business, we track the source of our calls. So if somebody calls on a specific listing, we ask them what they called on. And even today, in the day and age of the internet or whatever, the number one source of calls for properties that we have listed is a yard sign. So people that drive by, walk by, these businesses, they know they're open with signage. Maybe there's a limitation for businesses that have illuminating signs that can be during certain hours, right? That might be something to think about, but to eliminate a business being able to have a lit sign.
I think we're talking about light emitting.
Yeah, specific, right? Because I
Light
totally get where
emitting,
you're at on that.
not put a light on the sign that you have at X amount of nation of LED, bright, light emitting sign that use, and then code, it was message changing, flashing, movement, all that sort of stuff. I think that's a piece of mine, is light emitting signs. Like,
and I think
that doesn't point anywhere in the neighborhood, even if you have a business.
I agree. A good comparison would be, think of a billboard, right? You get this old school that got some of them don't have any lights. Some have the lights flashing or shining up on the billboard so you can see it at night, versus the, I don't know, crazy flashing, whatever, right? That
Or says, they're video boards.
Yeah, video boards.
Amazing.
Yeah, right. That's where I'm at with it. Yeah, try to eliminate that.
Yeah.
You can still have a sign in the yard. You can still have the sign on the building or whatever other.
Might even be able to have like a back, if you wanted a changeable sign that backlit, possibly. But I think the point of what we're trying to get at, and what she brought up, is that you don't want LED lights. You don't want the big bright LEDs, really light emitting.
How do we describe what I think we're all thinking about the same thing, essentially.
I think it's
what do we call it?
projecting sign.
It's
the description.
Projecting sign. When you say projecting sign, I see a sign that projects from the side of a building, like physically.
Correct. According to this code, a projecting sign is one that is supported by the wall of the building and is hanging out of the building in a perpendicular fashion to the orientation of the wall. Electronic message center is the signs that are have a computer inside or are controlled by a computer externally, that have usually LED screen boards that can show anything.
Right.
Okay.
We would want to exclude electronic.
Which it's not on the, because the sign types permitted in pedestrian residential is awning or canopy sign. Fine.
I think it'd be as simple as you add an asterisk there
Yeah.
under the PR that
Yeah.
you cannot have electronic message centers in the PR district, because you can have an electronic message center on a monument sign or a wall sign. You see what there's different
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
signs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you couldn't just say you can't have monuments. You would have to say the actual
So,
EMUs, they often call them, or EMCs. I mean,
Mhm.
And we're just obviously talking about the PR district right now as well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Electronic messaging
Center.
Center.
So
And where would this go ahead?
Here.
I would think you could just
Yeah.
make a note in the table under PR where it says page 87,
yeah.
PR.
It's like, as in specifically specify that electronic messaging centers
Okay.
are not allowed. That would, right.
Right.
Any of, in
Mhm.
any kind of sign.
Right. Alternatively, it could go under the, what is that, on page
82.
82, thank you, part F. It could be under there as well. We could really add it to both places to make it easier on the reader to see it either there or on the table.
Would you put it under section, and if you look at page 82, would you put it under section F then?
Correct. Yeah, I think I would also do what Heather was saying and add it to the table as well. Some users may look only at the table, some may read through that text, so it may be helpful to put it in both places.
Okay. Well, I'll give it a try at this and see if.
Fire away.
Okay, go for it.
I would make a motion that we recommend to city council that in section 150.81, section F, we have a statement that electronic message centers are not permitted in the pedestrian residential district. And that same language be added on page 87, I think it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Page 87, under the pedestrian residential district, under sign types permitted, that same comment, electronic message centers not allowed in this district.
I'll second that.
Amy, you tell us when you've got it down. Sure. A statement should be added to section F of 150.81 that says electronic message centers are not permitted in the pedestrian residential district. And, well, that's, and in section 150.83, which is the sign table, in the pedestrian residential district, a statement under sign types permitted shall state that electronic message centers are not permitted in the PR district. Okay, I made the motion. Nate seconded it.
Yes.
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 Okay, motion passes 8-0. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up?
I think I would just like to compliment you, Bob, on the leadership you've shown in getting us through that. You've been very, very patient, very politically correct, and shown great leadership ability. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody, really. I know I sent out an email before we started this process that I wanted all the commission members to take this very seriously and recognize that it might be the most important thing we ever do on the planning commission. And I think everybody took those words to heart and made contributions. I think every single person on the commission made contributions at one point or another. I also would thank the audience members, most of whom have all except two have left. But although you may not agree with some of the concepts that are in the proposed zoning code, your participation in the process is also appreciated. So with that, I think the final motion to make is that we send the proposed zoning code with the commission's recommendations to city council.
Oh, I'll second that.
Judy seconds it.
Can I interrupt for just one moment, please?
Oh, no.
I guess so, Nolan.
Thank you.
I forgot to thank you.
Well,
I forgot to thank you too.
That's why I was interrupting. Yeah. I just wanted to say that I do have a list of some typographical errors in a couple of places where I see some ambiguity and suggest a couple of changes that Heather and I have found in the code. I was able to send that to Heather around 6:30 p.m. today after making some different edits to it. That is something that I could share with you, or I could wait and share that with council, of course. Most of these, again, are typographical errors.
Yeah, that should be completely non-controversial. I don't think it needs any discussion among the planning commission. I just go straight to city council with those, Nolan.
Okay. Thank you.
And I do sincerely want to thank you for your participation in the process also. I know you're doing a job and getting paid for it, but I think your contributions were very important, and I was very impressed with your expertise in this area as we went along. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure working with you.
All right, so we didn't vote on that motion yet, did we?
No.
Okay, we had a motion. It was seconded by Judy. Jamie, call the roll, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
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 Okay, motion passes 8-0. Not quite completely done yet. We've still got Judy's report from the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Well, you can be very happy. We have not met for the last 2 months, but we will be meeting next Wednesday. So
I have a quick report. I'm sorry. I had to, it's been a couple months. Okay, so permit status, our permits are down quite a bit so far this year. So far, we're at 264 zoning permits compared to 339 this time last year. We've had 13 single-family housing starts this year compared to 20 this time last year. However, commercial industrial, we've had a lot of actual new construction permits for those. We've had 3 commercial and 2 industrial compared to 0 at this time last year. And again, that's strictly new construction. So we didn't count additions. We have had some of those also. So we literally just issued a permit yesterday for the new Culver's restaurant on West Gypsy Lane. And Phoenix Technology, we issued a permit for their new building on Fairview. And we currently have Caliper Collision being reviewed. That's on South Main Street next to Home Depot. OPM of Finley LLC, which is all size storage. They would like to build additional storage units. That's at 2041 Victory Lane. And then we currently are under review of Wood County Hospital doing a new building, a pharmaceutical distribution warehouse at 2231 Venture Drive, which is in the John Quinn Innovative Tech Park. Subdivisions, we still have Stonebrook construction plans under review, and obviously the zoning code updates continuing, and we've made quite a bit of progress, I'd say, so far. Additionally, you may have read in the paper that the city is participating with the Reimagining Rural Regions R3 program, and that is an exciting program that will help the city with the downtown, the future of that, planning, placemaking, a lot of exciting things. And as I understand it, Mr. Spittler and Mr. Remus are on that steering committee, so you can give us updates probably better than I can. So we'll expect that for each month when we have a meeting. The full reports, please. And then also I've mentioned historic preservation. They've been really busy. We actually have some memorandums of understanding signed to place University Hall on our local historic register, along with the Wood County Courthouse and former jail. So again, a lot of exciting things there. And the commission's also working on a plan for interpretive signage around town. And also they've been working hard on highlighting a historic building each month in the city e-news and social media. It's really exciting if you happen to see those and read about all the history of these buildings. And then last night, City Council did pass the rezoning for 220 Manville Avenue, which was a change from M1 light industrial to R2 single family. You had held a public hearing on that a couple months ago, so I just want to give you an update that that was passed. So that's it, unless you have questions.
Okay, thank you, Heather. With that, I make a motion to adjourn. Judy seconded and
Wait,
me, can I make a comment first?
okay, please.
It'll be just a minute. I wanted to go on the record of this meeting, to thank you all for your hard work. We knew at the very beginning that this was going to be an expensive process, was going to require a hard work and dedication. And you guys are really committed to the task. And I just want to thank you all very much for your work on this specific topic, but also everything that you do for the Bowling Green community. We do appreciate what you do. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
meeting
Okay,
adjourned.
with that, we adjourn the meeting. I moved, Judy seconded. Everybody said yes.
There you go. Thank you, Nolan.
I distinctly heard that.
Yes.